hello everybody. So this panel, welcome three of our panelists. So first, Henry from Penumbra Labs.
Yeah.
And Jayant from Mantra, co-founder.
You can call me Jay.
Huh?
Jay is easier.
Jay.
Yeah, just
Jay,
Jay.
amazing, thanks. And Adam from SSV Labs. All right. Thank you so much. Would you guys like to briefly introduce yourself?
Do you want
You want to start?
Sure. So I'm Adam from SSV Labs, one of the co-founders. We are building a project called SSV Network, and we mainly focus on DVT, distributed validator technology. What it allows you to do is basically operate a validator with four or more non-trusting machines. We launched on mainnet around a year ago. We currently manage around 1.5 million ETH at stake, a bit more than that. And yeah, we have our booth over there, so welcome to head over and have a chat.
Hi guys, I'm Jay, co-founder of Mantra Chain. Essentially, we are building L1 to bring tokenized assets into the blockchain ecosystem, and essentially working towards bringing RWAs on chain as well. As of October 23rd, we went public with our mainnet, so it's still very fresh in everybody's mind. And we're building for bringing the next wave of users as well as capital on chain.
Cool. Yeah, my name is Henry. I'm the founder of Penumbra. It's a fully private, shielded L1, initially in the Cosmos ecosystem. And basically, Penumbra is sort of blockchains as they should have been. Namely the dream of having electronic cash. So with Penumbra, you can take any asset from any IBC connected chain, bring it over to Penumbra, record the funds totally privately, and do on-chain trading with private strategies. And what's kind of interesting is that along the way to building that, we had to rethink a lot of things. And so there's some interesting lessons for staking that come out of how do you build private staking.
Awesome. So let's get into it. So we're gonna start lightly about how do you guys think about the token issuance objective function? What is the function of this? Like, is it, of course, it's mainly about validator rewards as well, but we can also touch on a topic of like sustainable economic for the network. Anyone want to?
Yeah, I'd be happy to hop right in over here, because this is something that we've been thinking about quite a bit. And the way that I would like to just frame it before I even dive into it is that, for the most part, when you have a dApp, you're looking at a token as a balance sheet basis, where you have a revenue, you have some sort of a cost, and then you have a business that you're running. But when we started looking at Mantra Chain itself, what I realized at least is that on a chain, you're looking at it as a GDP basis, because you're building an economy and you're creating productivity and you're shipping things out and you're bringing things in. So from that perspective, yes, there is token issuance that is required, but as with any monetary system, there is an inflationary factor that might be needed so that you can continue to progress that and build it out. So that's the way that we think about issuance in general.
All right, I think token issuance, if you strip away a lot of the kind of virtuous signaling behind it, at the early stage, it's more about adoption, bootstrapping a project, launching a project. So a lot of the token issuance will be kind of concentrated there. In later stages of a project's life cycle, it will be obviously about managing cost of security, sustainability. But yeah, it's mostly about bootstrapping a project properly, because if you don't have adoption and market share, then discussing decentralization is essentially kind of meaningless.
Yeah, I think a useful frame to think about this is the idea of like cybernetic control, right? So you have some big decentralized permissionless system, namely the blockchain, and for all those different objectives, it's not that there's a single one that is the most important, but it's that each of these aspects are kind of one part of the necessary functioning of this big system. And so a successful issuance mechanism really has to be this kind of like autonomous, neutral control system that can incentivize enough of the right behavior without oversupplying. And there's always going to be error there. And so a lot of these design decisions boil down, I think, to like, where are, we, or whatever that community around that blockchain, where are we comfortable with making that error? So for example, with inflationary issuance for security, right? Is it more important to be over-conservative about how much security budget there is, or is it more important to be conservative about kind of the soundness of the token? Like, these are different. I think it's not useful to try to be like, oh, this is the right answer. It's more that for each community around a chain, what are they trying to relatively prioritize relative to other aspects?
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a interesting, also fascinating topic because, for example, like BTC, right? It's basically inflationary, but also deflationary, like long term. And Ethereum also like switched like after the merge, for example. So there is also a talk a lot about the thinking about the inflation, or aka the token issuance, like a native token, is some sort of a tax on the holders, basically. And this is like, do you guys think this is justified in a sense where, let's say you are a participation of Ethereum, right? And you like a long-term holder of ETH, then there is like annual inflation, which is like reducing the value of the token that you hold. But on the other hand, if you would have been holding stable coins, right, you will not be impacted from this inflationary model as much. Do you think like this could be justified? Is it already good for Ethereum holders, or like, what's your thought on this?
I think a useful way to think about this is thinking of inflationary issuance as broadly being a transfer from the subset of the token holders that are participating in securing the network to the ones that aren't. And in that frame, I think this question is a lot easier to analyze because it's, for instance, if somebody is just a long-term holder, but they're not actually staking, then in some sense, they're kind of like free riding off of the token holders who are. And it also opens up the kind of technical design question of, if you remove barriers to staking, namely participation in that economic security mechanism, then it might be that the importance of that question reduces. So if, for instance, everybody just like holds liquid staking tokens, then the fact that there's some inflationary issuance doesn't really necessarily matter to me, because I can just be like pricing all of my tokens in terms of like, staked ETH or whatever. So I think thinking of it in that kind of transfer way is more clarifying, because it helps focus it more on like, what is the behavior that this part of the system is trying to incentivize or not.
I mean, yeah, just adding on to that essentially is like, if you figure out the incentives of an ecosystem, you can understand how people are going to behave over there. So if we take Ethereum as an example, it is an economic layer for most of crypto that exists right now. All of blockchain finance has been built over there. So the tax as such on Ethereum issuances in terms of developing this ecosystem out. So would I rather hold a token that doesn't inflate but also doesn't develop the ecosystem? Or would I rather hold a stable coin, in which case I would rather just hold US dollars instead of USDC? So it comes down to what is my risk reward as a holder of this token that I would be willing to put up with. And I believe that there's an entire ecosystem over here and financial model that can be built out. And for that, I'm willing to take on the tax as such that you framed it as, so that I can further this ecosystem or benefit from what happens over here. So an initial increase in tax, but a smaller slice of a bigger pie. I think that's what we're all working towards here.
I actually have a different opinion on that.
Okay, please.
So basically, I mean, on one point, I agree that like, okay, holding Ethereum long term, right, is contributing to the system, because you like, into this totally participating like in all these things happening, and also, of course, you secure Ethereum in some way, right? But by holding stablecoin or like, some tokenized asset and so on and so forth, I would see it as like, let's say we compare to fiat world, right? Let's say fiat, this bank exists in USA and the main currency is USD. But obviously you can also open like some other like yen account or like Thai baht account and whatnot, right? And even though that's not contributing, like, basically the bank doesn't pay tax in yens, obviously, right? It's still contributing to, kind of adding more utility to the bank itself because it basically can hold many different type of assets, right? And I think bank that has like a total value of, assets accumulating maybe in different currency also kind of maybe grow faster. But anyway, please.
Right.
Actually,
So go back to the original question,
Yeah.
I guess. So I think the kind of notion of inflation is kind of a tax on holders and it might be bad, is a bit binary. I think inflation, if it promotes growth, is not necessarily inflationary. It might be even deflationary. So if you issue a grant to Uniswap, to build Uniswap, eventually it's a plus for the ecosystem. And I think there are other levers in Ethereum, for example, where you have inflation for securing the network, right? You pay validators. But on the other side of that, you lock a lot of capital. And then you reduce sort of the amount of ETH in circulation. So, I mean, it's a bit simplistic to say kind of inflation is tax on holders. I think it could be a plus. It depends on how much growth and activity it generates on the other end.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think like we have to think of it as a more holistic sense, right? How much do you get from the network over time as a long-term holders and so on, instead of like simply taxing due to inflation. All right, so I have the next question about basically the, how would you think that the token issuance could incentivize a validator to, kind of work better, to have like a higher uptime rate for the network? You think it's relevant? You think it's not relevant? Just like the context, right? Like Ethereum or any other like popular POS chain, the uptime is already 99.7%. So it's kind of high already. So what do you think? Is it like a good incentive or?
Obviously, it's a good incentive because if you have 99+%, then the incentive obviously works. So yeah, you have to have this incentive because there's a cost for running validators, and then there's the opportunity cost of locking your capital. So yeah, it seems to be working.
Makes sense. But should it go higher? Should like, for example, the block reward, should it go like higher? Would it plateau or, could we reach like 100% uptime? Like, would it make sense? Like, it's like, no, right?
I mean, if incentivization should go higher?
Yeah, like should the incentive go higher, like the reward, for example, the inflation, right?
I mean, it depends on kind of what type of behavior you want to incentivize in a network. So, for example, rewards were very high during the Beacon Chain Genesis because you wanted a lot of stake to come in and a lot of people to come in and secure the network. Obviously, it went down as time goes by because you don't need that much security and that many people to participate. But then there's a lot of discussion right now on incentivizing different behaviors. So, for example, solo stakers, right? So to reduce the balance required for staking, and then kind of democratizing staking even further, specifically in Ethereum, right? So it really depends, right? So issuance right now seems to be working in Ethereum. I think right now the question is a bit more nuanced. So where would you like to kind of take issuance moving forward? And where would you like to put more kind of emphasis when it comes to issuance or even higher rewards to incentivize stakeholders and participants in the network to behave in a certain way?
Yeah, good point. All right, so what do you guys think about the change in token issuance of Ethereum? I think there are many camps on this, like should we, because of this 1559, right? That like they're also burning as well. And usually the burn rate is higher than the issuance rate, I think. So making Ethereum like a full like inflationary, at least at this point. What do you think? Like, should there be any change? Like, I understand like Vitalik like promote for like, yeah, we should have a balanced view, but do you guys have any other different opinions?
It's a monetary policy for a network. So I think that as the network matures, and as you were mentioning, right, like when you're early on, you want to bootstrap a network and you want to have high inflation and then high rewards and then bring validators in. And then as you move towards a blockchain which is quite mature like Ethereum, the requirements start to change because now you want to secure that network and be able to do certain other things part of it, right? So I think that change is going to happen. It depends on the requirements of the blockchain. At this point in time, we want to make sure that we're not diluting the people that are staking it too much. In that way, you're also incentivizing more usage because the more usage you have, the more gas fees that you pay, the more deflationary it gets. So I think from that perspective, at this point in time, it comes down to how do we have that balance in that monetary policy. But again, I come back to monetary policy and the requirements that a particular chain has, and it keeps evolving.
Can I comment on that? So I think monetary policy is one way to look at things, but if you look at the way a blockchain incentivizes users, let's say in Ethereum, monetary policy, I think, is a bit problematic because if you look at the different kind of main changes in issuance happening over the past few years, you have the transition to POS, you have the burn, you have blobs, and in each and every change, there is sort of a technological roadmap or sort of an endpoint where the network wants to reach. So I think the kind of the incentive from sort of the core team was more to incentivize a specific roadmap. So I don't know, like a roll-up-centric Ethereum or the burn, which introduced a lot of changes in gas transparency and usage. Also, POS is an example of that. So I think if the kind of the technological roadmap and assumptions are right, that's what should drive incentives moving forward, and not necessarily a monetary policy which kind of drives sort of an economic standpoint on the way you change tokenomics in an ecosystem.
See, that's where the difference comes because you're coming from it from a tech perspective because you're a tech person. I come from it from an economic perspective because I'm an economic person. So then it just comes down to how do we make the financialization of this technology also match the roadmap and the incentives for the rest of the team.
Yeah, but you think right now if the discussion would be let's change tokenomics for the sake of, I know, end users being less diluted when it comes to issuance would be a better way than Vitaly coming in and saying we need to reduce costs for L2s, so let's introduce blobs and all of that. So I understand it's two different viewpoints. Completely understand and agree with what you're saying. But yeah, I think eventually in a good ecosystem, sort of the technological roadmap should kind of be the main driver for decision making. By the way, I'm not a tech guy, I'm like you and more economics person.
I think one thing that's interesting with Ethereum and 1559 specifically is that there's a kind of unfortunate like collision of wants or interests where 1559 originally was supposed to be about resource use. And in this big decentralized world computer, how do we ensure that people who are consuming resources by doing stuff are adequately paying for the costs of the resources that they're consuming. But because that ended up burning a lot of tokens, there's now also a whole lot of people who are interested in 1559 as a like, this is a token number go up because burn mechanism. And that's like a very different goal. And I think to this question of sort of where these conflicting, what's the resolution of conflicting priorities? I think that this is a place where we're seeing basically an ultimately political battle that people are, talking about in various technical ways, but really it's a political thing between these different objectives.
But in the burn, there were a lot of changes to the way gas works and transparency, and I mean, it wasn't only token go up because now we're burning more ETH. And kind of what you're seeing right now, by the way, is Ethereum became inflationary again, right, with the introduction of blobs.
Yeah,
so,
sorry, to clarify, when I say like there's people who are interested in it as a like a number go up thing, I'm not talking about the Ethereum mechanism designers. I'm talking about the people who like go and they look at a graph on like ultrasound money or whatever and they're like, oh, burning tokens, that's great, right?
Because to them, the token is the product.
Yes.
So it's like we have tech, we have economics, and we have politics. So all of us have different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. Also, like a lot of people seeing this and support this, like 1559, because of the token goes up, right? But like basically, this also enable like the tipping to validator as well, which is like increasing the rewards for the validators, right? Like because usually getting the rewards by like this inflationary like staking rewards like directly for running the nodes, validator client. Yeah. So the next question would be it's gonna be about the legal issue. So basically, in some jurisdiction, right, the token issuance is treated differently than token appreciation. Yeah, so in other words, the issuance scheme have more favorable tax scheme than others. Do you have any thoughts about this? This is gonna be the last question.
No idea.
So I think here actually there's a kind of happy convergence between some of the legal stuff and also some technical things. So one thing that's kind of interesting for Penumbra, we built this like private staking system, and one of the first design questions that we were trying to confront is like, okay, if you have a shielded chain where you can't see everybody's account balances, how is the chain supposed to pay out staking rewards? And the answer is, well, you can't really, and so you have to design a mechanism that doesn't require paying out rewards. So what that ends up looking like is sort of native per validator liquid staking tokens. But this ends up having a lot of really interesting efficiency gains, right? And if you just think about, okay, what happens when you have like 1 million holders of staking token, right? Is it more technically efficient to make 1 million payments of staking rewards to each one of those accounts, or to just like change the exchange rate of the staking token that they hold? And so I think that I think that the sort of conflict between what is the sort of like legally optimal thing and what is the technically optimal thing actually ends up conveniently not really being that much of a trade-off, because when you have staking tokens that kind of bundle in the rewards just for technical reasons, that ends up being just a lot more convenient. You can record those privately. It's a lot easier to wrap them in other things. You can transfer them around. In general, tokenize everything is a very winning, like, technical instinct. And so I think that there ends up not being a huge trade-off there.
So I think from a technical perspective, there isn't that much of a trade-off. But then when we look at the legalities and how that transfers into the real world, because that's the real-world asset space that we're playing around with on Mantra, every jurisdiction looks at it slightly differently. So then when it comes down to if you have a validator in a particular jurisdiction and they are earning rewards in a particular way, they would need to book it. And this is very boring, I know, from an accounting perspective. But you have to book it in a particular way in that jurisdiction. So let's say Singapore, for example, has something where they say that if you don't burn the gas fees, then it's a security. Whereas in Switzerland, where we are incorporated and the association is established, over there they say that if you distribute the gas fee, then that's where, if you have to burn it, otherwise it's going to be considered a security. So every single jurisdiction looks at it slightly differently, and I think we're going to get to a convergence point where the technology, I think as technologists, we all agree that there is a benefit to having inflationary economics for at least the initial validators for a blockchain. But from a legal perspective, then it starts becoming more of a cutting up the pie and trying to share that, and then the lawyers make a lot of money. So it's just the entire ecosystem from the legal point of view is now waking up to the fact that there is something relevant over here, and nobody knows how to deal with it, because there's 3 people over here, and all 3 of us have slightly different perspectives on it. Now imagine you have a room full of lawyers who get paid to talk for a living. That's the entire ecosystem that's playing around right now.
Maybe a small comment about regulation and the way jurisdictions look at crypto. So I'm not sure, I'm not an expert, but right now we have Trump in the White House with a very pro-crypto agenda. Hopefully this will kind of proliferate a lot of the crypto activities happening around the world, and we might be less concerned about how to balance between different jurisdictions, because hopefully it'll be more of a free-for-all and less regulation, because a lot of it stems from the US eventually, but let's see, hopeful.
Hopeful. Yeah, so that's a great end to the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much.
All right.